Hi, I'm Dave Kites from the OToW Woodshop. We're going to make a video this evening about our new planer, no surface planer. We just got this about 2 weeks ago now, and it's working out really, really well. We had an old planer, a Grizzly, and it was 15 inches wide, and it had seen its best days. It still worked, but we wanted one that was wider, so we investigated and decided to buy this Powermatic 209 HH1. It's a model 209. HH means it's got the helical head in it, and 1 means it runs on one phase of electricity. But anyway, it's right near the top of the line for planers today out there in the market, other than if you go, of course, to commercial machines and so on. But it's an extremely good quality machine. It costs more, of course, but we had the money, and so we're lucky enough to be able to buy it. Now, the planer is to be used for reducing the thickness of wood and other wood-like materials. It provides, because of the way this one is built, a very smooth finish, smooth as you might get from sanding. Smoother than you'll get from an 80 grit sandpaper, which is what we have on our drum sander. Other advantages to using this instead of the drum sander, for thinning wood at least, is that it will accept glue, finishes, paint, pitch, things like that. And if your board is uneven, a little uneven, not grossly uneven, but a little uneven, it does a better job of straightening it up, making it flat. So it is better in those ways than the drum sander. The only thing it doesn't like is metal. So you want to be sure that you check your wood for hidden nails, screws, staples, whatever might be in there. The metal, it'll process it, but it might chip some of the cutters. What we have inside of here is 5 rows of little square carbide cutters mounted in spiral rolls that spiral around the shaft, and they are set in there so they overlap, and so it covers the whole surface of the material for the complete 20 inches wide. And every time the drum goes around once, it makes 5 cuts. And it runs at 5,000 RPM. So you get a lot of cuts, and you get a very smooth result. So it's an excellent head. As far as I could tell when I did my research, it was the best that I could find for a ordinary wood shop type planer. It has a 5-horse motor. It requires a lot of power. If you're thinking about getting one yourself, you're going to need a 60 amp breaker if you get the single phase 220 volts. So it takes a lot of power. But anyway, so more about the planer itself. It has a lot of nice features. Of course, they all have these return rollers, so if you're working with somebody and you feed it through and your partner's over here, he puts them up on here and sends them back to you, and you just pull them off there and run them through. And you do run them through multiple times. I'm going to talk about that a couple more times, but you have to take small cuts, and you want to take small cuts because you get a better finish, and it's easier to control the thickness that you're getting to, obviously, when you take small cuts. It will overload even though it's 5 horses, and so this book says that 3/32 of an inch is the maximum you can cut off at one time if you're using the full 20-inch width. So obviously you can cut off more than that if you're not doing the whole 20-inch width, but I'm telling you that you're going to start to get a less smooth finish if you do that, and it's really not worth it. It doesn't take long to process the boards through here. So we've got a nice helical head in there. This is the part that moves. When you make an adjustment for the thickness that you're going to be planing, this goes up and down. This sits still. This wheel, of course, is what makes this go up and down. And this knob and another one just like it back here lock the table in position once you get it where you want. It protects against the vibration of the machine causing it to drift down. It doesn't drift anyways, but I just use one handle usually when I'm using it, just for to be safe. It really doesn't need to be done. The wheel goes around this way or this way, of course, but the key is that this edge of the wheel, this entrance side, this side of the wheel, moves in the same direction that the table does. And that's the easy way to remember which way to go. So if you want to make thinner, and you want the table to come up to do that, of course, then you turn this wheel this way so that this edge goes up, and the other way if you want it to go down. Okay, very simple. So you just turn it to where you want it, then I just do that much tightening and ready to go. The wheel moves the table 57 thousandths of an inch each revolution. Now that's almost a 16th. 16th is 62 and a half thousandths. So it's 5.5 thousandths under a 16th of an inch every full revolution of this wheel. When I use the machine, and I would encourage you to do likewise, is I do a full turn if I'm under about 12 inches in width and I'm trying to quickly reduce the thickness. So I take off almost a 16th of an inch each pass. If it's really wide, I'll reduce that and do a half a turn at a time, which is only a 32nd of an inch. But we're just planing at that point, and we shouldn't be in such a big hurry that we want to take off an 1/8 of an inch. If you try to, and it's too wide, it's going to load this down and it's going to trip it out. So it's just easier to handle the wood, and it's easier on the machine, and it gives a better finish if you take light passes. So half a revolution at a time is my standard. That said, I think we should talk about how to turn it on. This switch that they provided here has a little trick to it. Okay? This is obviously the start button, but this is the stop switch. When the stop switch is pushed in, and that's how you stop the machine when you're done, you just push this in and it stops the machine. You have to get this to come out before this button will turn on the machine. To get this to come out, it's got these white arrows painted on this red part, and that would tell you, wouldn't it? Oh, you twist that and then it pops out. Well, the way they build it, this outside, this is a two-piece setup here. There's a little knurled red part in the back, and in the front, there's this solid, smooth-edged red part with arrows on it. The solid, smooth-edged part with arrows on it doesn't rotate. What rotates is the little knurled part in the back. So you reach back here, and with your fingers, you just twist the little knurled part. So I'll do that again. If you try to turn the front thing, see, it doesn't turn. You take the back part here, where the knurled edge is, and you twist that just a little bit, it pops right out. Okay? So don't get frustrated trying to make it work. Eventually you probably get, by accident, you turn the knurled part and it would work. But it's the knurled part, that's the key. So I wanted to make sure that detail is there. This is the switch for the vacuum system. You should always run the vacuum system. If you don't, if this thing plugs up, and we had that happen on our old planer, it plugged up, the fellow using it didn't realize it, and he kept on planing, and he eventually filled up this whole area inside here with chips, and he actually stalled the rotor and burned up the motor in our old planer. That was a few years ago now, but we still remember that. So we want to keep the flow going here for the chips when we're using the planer. And that is easily checked in our system by looking in plexiglass windows here. This is not a siphon, this is just a baffle arrangement, but it does work. But when you're planing, you want to look fairly often into this window here and see that you see chips flying around. Okay, if you see the chips flying around, it's open, it's working, that's fine. If you don't see chips flying around and you're planing, then this thing's gotten plugged up. Okay, and you need to unplug it. So if it's plugged or you suspect it's plugged, I made this really fancy device here. And this just slips off. So now you can look in the plenum, and if it's plugged up, you can take a shop vac and go in there and clean it out. The plenum will come off with just removing these 3 screws, but and 3 underneath, 6 altogether. But you shouldn't need to do that, especially if you catch it early. And if this gets plugged, same thing, stick the shop vac hose in here and vacuum it out. Okay, goes back, you just line up the holes and put this very expensive, sophisticated lock in there. And that's that. So later, after we've made some chips, I'll show you how to empty this rig over here. Because we do want our users to empty that red bin every time they use the planer. So it's empty for the next guy. It builds up fast. Planing generates a large volume of chips. You'll see. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you the way to eliminate guessing and how to get started. I've got just an old piece of 2x4 here. It's been used somewhere. It's kind of scuzzed up. I'm going to use that to demonstrate. So first thing we need to do is get this table in about the right place to start. So we're going to lower it down until our board will slide underneath freely. Okay. Now, there's this little bar right here. The manufacturer put that on there. If your wood is full width and won't go under this bar, or excuse me, if your wood is not full width, you should test it here if you're not sure. But with the way I'm showing you, you will be sure. But if you're not sure, test it in the middle here. And if it hits this bar rather than go underneath, you're trying to cut too deep. You have to lower the table more. Because see, over here there's more restriction than over here, so I can cut thicker over here than I can over here. You can cut anywhere on here. It's the same all the way across. It's very horizontal. It's very parallel. It doesn't bend or deflect or anything. So you can run your wood through anywhere, and we'll see when we do multiple pieces that's what we do. We have them staggered across the width, and they all get the same treatment. So now we put this in here, and this is the way I like to start it. It's loose, okay? And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you, because when I turn the machine on, it's a little noisy, so you won't be able to hear me. What I'm going to do is now that I know this is in there and loose, I'm going to turn on the vacuum, and then I'm going to turn on the planer, and then I'm going to slowly raise the table until the planer picks up my piece and runs it through the planer. And I'm going to let it finish running through and go all the way through. And it probably won't plane anything. It'll just catch it with the driving rollers and run it through. But I'll know that I'm very close to cutting. So what I do then, after I get that, I take the board back and I make a full turn on the wheel. That means I moved it up a 16th, and then I feed it through again. Now if I do that, I know that I'm going to cut less than a 16th. I didn't cut anything the first time. I moved it a 16th, got to cut less than a 16th. So there's no chance of jamming it up or overloading it. If I don't follow a procedure like this, and I just guess, and I say, well, that's free, I'll go here, and now I'll feed it in, I may be trying to cut way too much, too fast, and it's going to give me trouble. So, again, loose. Let me say what's inside of here. There are, first thing in line inside of here, hanging down, are pawls. Anti-kickback pawls. Similar to things on the saw, except these are on a rod and there's a whole bunch of metal pieces. And each one is shaped so that the wood will go by it, but it won't let it come back. Okay? So that's what we got first. You can hear them rattle when I do that. Okay? And then the next thing we've got is a driving roller. That pushes the wood through here. And then we've got the chip deflector, and then we've got the cutters, then we got another chip deflector. The chip deflectors, when the chips get cut, it deflects them from going down onto the table, and it roots them up into the plenum so the vacuum can carry them away. So two chip deflector on either side of the cutter. And then we've got the exit roller. The feed roller is grooved, spiral grooves on it. We'll see them when we first make our first pass here. We'll make an impression in the wood. And if we don't plane anything, we'll just leave those impressions in the wood. They're not very deep, but you can see them. When you're planing, it makes the depressions, but then the planer takes it off, so you never see them. Okay. So there's all that stuff in the top, and on the bottom there are two spring-loaded rollers that hold the wood up and make sure that it's up against the cutter and the other rollers, even if it's not exactly even. That's why they're spring-loaded. So this machine will straighten out minor flatness problems. It won't do much for severe unflat, and it won't do much for twisted wood, okay? It won't do anything for warped wood. You know, warped wood is where you look down the 2x4 and the broadside is up here, and you look down the 2x4 and it's going like this, all right? That's warped. And when you feed it through here, it just takes it and it feeds it in and back out again, and it gets thinner, but it still comes out warped. So don't think you're going to come here with a warped board and leave with a flat board a little thinner. Not going to happen. It's just going to be thinner. It's still going to be warped. So, that's all said. Let's go ahead now, and I'll start it. Slowly raise it till it grabs this, feeds it through, and then I'll take one full turn and I'll feed it through again, and we should get our first bites of planing. We did a little bit of a remake there, but anyway, this is the second pass. The first pass didn't cut anything, it just fed it through. Then I took one full turn on the wheel, a 1/16 of an inch almost, moved up, fed it through again, and this is what I got. A very nice, very smooth surface, very smooth surface. It looked a lot like this before. Okay. I wouldn't have had to do a full turn, I could have done a half a turn. I took off just maybe even a little less. You can make very light cuts with this thing. Now, I have not moved the wheel again, and I want to show you that without adjusting the height of the table, without moving the wheel, if I feed it through again, it's going to plane a little bit more off. The spring-loaded rollers in there make that happen. Okay? So if you're trying to get a really nice finish and you got real close to your dimension, just feed it through again without changing the height of the table, and you'll get a polishing effect on it. But I'm not going to feed the cut side through. I'm going to show you that it does cut some more by cutting on this other side here. Okay? So we'll do that. Good. This shows us more than I was planning to cut. We got a little more cutting on the edges, but nothing in the middle, because our board is cupped. Our board is cupped like this, so it was hitting the high spots on the edges and not the middle. But it did take just a little bit more off where it did hit, okay? So they have to understand how this thing is really working. Okay, so now if I want to plane this side nice and smooth, what I'll do is I'll turn everything on. I'll make a half a turn here, take a 30-second off of here, and it should come out looking really nice because I don't think it's cupped any more than 30 seconds of it. Good demo board. See, up here it was less cupped and it planed the whole surface for us. This was more cupped and it didn't get to it. And this little bit here was more cupped and it didn't get to it. So now these are very parallel here and very smooth, but down here where the board was more cupped, it didn't reach the cut it, so we still got rough spot. Simple enough. Half a revolution. Or maybe a little more. Fully planed. Okay, 2 sides. Then you look at this and you say, gee, I wonder if this would work. Well, it does. It does work. What you want to be careful of if you do try to do these edges, I wouldn't do anything less than 1 inch wide. Just, it probably wouldn't tip over, but if it did, it would really mess it up. So, ain't worth that. Use a joiner and clean it up that way, or use a table saw and just take a whisker cut if it's reasonably straight. If it's not reasonably straight and flat on the side you're going to put against the table, then don't do it. Because you don't want it rocking and rolling or twisting as it goes through there. But if it's pretty solid on the table, you can plane the edges. Okay? I guess I'll do that. Just to show that. So we lower the table down. This will plane 8 inches high. So you can have a pretty tall thing or thick piece of wood. Now, what it won't do is short pieces. 6 3/4 inches is the shortest that the book says you should feed through this machine. The way the rollers are in there, it won't drive it through properly if it's shorter than that. So don't try to do anything shorter than 6 3/4 inches. Okay? So now I've got this down almost far enough so I clear and unclear. I would do this the same way I did the other one. Thinner, so it didn't plane any here. So if I want to clean this all up, I have to erase the table and take some more off of there. But I'm not going to bother to do that. But it did go through okay. All right, so now what you've probably heard people talk about with planers is snipe. Snipe happens when you feed the board in and it gets part way and just gets started a little bit, and all of a sudden the board does this and you hear a big buzzing noise, and so your tendency is to either push it down or jam it through, and then when you do that it finishes going on through. And then when you get your board out, the other side, and you look at it, there's a whole bunch of wood missing here, just maybe for that far. That's snipe. What happens is, the way the rollers are positioned in there, it's not like a wash machine. They're not on top of each other. They're offset a little bit. And so it can get over one roller, and before it gets held down by the other, or held by the other roller, it can tip down into a little bit here. It's up on this roller and it can tip down a little bit. And when it comes back up, it comes up too far and it hits the cutter and it cuts the wood off the edge. So, to avoid that, the easiest way is to just hold the board down. And it works just fine if you have a board that's reasonably long. If it's short, then it's harder to hold it down because you don't have the leverage. And the front end is doing that dippy-do, and you only have this much leverage to try and counteract it. So it's hard to do it that way. So if you have short boards, the best way to avoid snipe is to have either sacrifice boards the same thickness, or use your other boards that are production boards and run them through in a batch. Because if you have a board that starts in there, I'm looking for a board, well, if you have a board that's the same thickness as this, because you've been planing them together, and you put that in there first, if it snipes, you don't care, it's the sacrifice board. But the rest of that board that's still engaged in here keeps the rollers where they should be, and this piece, when it gets in there, will not be tipped by the rollers, because the rollers are being held where they should be by that other board that already did tip and got sniped in the beginning. Same thing on the following end. If you have another piece that you can put alongside of this workpiece, when it gets near the end, when it gets up here, put it in, okay, and have it stick out here past this workpiece, then it will keep the rollers right while the tail end of this one finishes going through, and it won't snipe on that end either. If you don't use the entrance and exit following pieces, if your board is long enough, just hold it down. That's what I was doing before. And you see, I didn't suffer any snipe. You hold it down and keep it from kicking up. You just hold it down here, and now it's in the middle, it's running. You walk over here and you put your hands on it and hold it down on the outfeed table. When it comes through, it won't tip then either, and it won't snipe on either end. Okay? So you don't have to, some people, I don't know why, I guess they never figured out how to avoid it, but because of the snipe, they always cut their wood longer than they want, so that when it snipes, they can cut that part off and throw it away. And that's okay if it's cheap wood. If it's expensive wood, then it's kind of wasteful. So hold it down here. Walk around when it's coming out, hold it down here, and you shouldn't have any snipe issues. If you have shorter pieces, then start some other pieces of scrap about the same thickness when you first start planing, and as you progress, just keep using those pieces on the entrance and the exit, and it'll keep it from sniping your production workpiece. Okay, so we did some basic planing here. We ran this old 2x4 through a couple times, and we did a one pass on the edge and learned about how it works. And now let's talk about, I want to plane this down to a certain thickness. So how do I approach that? Obviously, you gotta have to measure it somehow. And most people start out by saying, I'll measure it with this. It depends on how close you need it. If you're within a 1/16 of an inch is okay, then you can probably manage with this if you're careful. If you get a good straight ruler instead, you can probably manage a little better. get a little more precise. If it's under about 1 1/16", you can use a Wixie gauge like this if you invest in one. I think it costs about $20. And this guy is really handy. You turn him on, he says 0. He'll work in millimeters or in inches. And you calibrate it, you hold it together, and you hold the 0 button and press it in and out, and now it says 0, okay? And when it goes all the way open, it says 1.17 inches. Okay. So it's about 1 1/8", a little over 1 1/8". So if it's thin enough so it'll go in here, this is a real easy way, and it's to 1/1000th of an inch, or to 1/10 of a millimeter. Very precise. Okay. It won't reach into the board very far, but you can trust this machine. If it's been planed, it's the same all the way across. This is very precisely aligned. Okay? So let's say we want to take this piece down to, he's too thick for the Wixie gauge, so we'll just use our straight edge here. I'm going to do, both edges have been planed at least once. Okay, you can't have a rough edge here and try to measure because it's just not precise enough. So right now it says 1 3/8 inches exactly. Very, as close as I can read it with this nice ruler. So let's say we want to take it down to 1 1/8 inches. Okay, so we want 1/4 of an inch off. So we know we're only going to take off about 1/16 of an inch pass, so we're going to need about 4 passes. So knowing that we're going to need about 4 passes, the first couple passes can just be a full turn of the wheel and don't really even need to measure, right? Because we know it's going to be okay, it's not going to be too thin. So we're going to set this up, and for our start, up there, and I'm going to see, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do so you know. Okay. I'm going to get it just like I was starting fresh. Okay, I'm going to run it through first, and then I'm going to run it through once, and it's going to plane a little bit off. And I'm going to check the thickness. And then, because I know I'm in contact at that point, then I'm going to make my full turn. I'm going to take 1/16 off of this side. I'm going to look at my work. Always look at your work. Usually in a project, one face or the other is going to show. Seldom both faces are going to show. So if you've got blemishes or defects in the wood like this that don't hurt your project structurally, but you don't want to see them, then you're going to pick your best side for the one that shows. So be looking at your wood and take it off evenly. As a general practice, I always flip my board. I flip my board every time unless there's a reason not to. Okay? So we're going to start like we were starting fresh, get it zeroed in, take a turn, make a pass, flip it over, take a turn, make a pass, and then we'll check again. Okay? Okay, so we did that. We did our pass on each side. And now I'm down, and I am 1 1/4 and a 32nd. So I only got a 32nd to go. And that's because I did my math wrong. Remember I said 4 passes? But remember I said it was 1 3/8, and I wanted to get down to 1 1/4, so I was really only taking off 1/8, and the 2 passes of almost the 16th. You see how it worked? Almost perfect. Because now it's just over my 1 1/4. So the 2 times 16th makes an 8, and that's what's gone. Okay? Just a hair less actually is gone. So it all worked, but my mental math, I subtracted 1/8 from 1 3/8 and got 1/4. This isn't true. So again, I'll double check, and now if you check in edges, in the beginning this 2x4, like all 2x4s, had a rounded edge. No, you can't measure to that. That's why I was measuring here before. Remember, I looked on the edge. Okay, but now the rounded part's gone. So now I can measure here now. And yep, I just need a 30-second over. I just have to believe it. So, a 30 seconds, how much is that? Well, it's a half a turn about. A little bit more. But if I do just a half a turn, there to there, and then lock it, and I make my pass, it should be still a hair over. I maybe have a hard time seeing it, even on this ruler. And if I have a big Wixie gauge, I can check it. Or, if I have a vernier, I can still check it, because this guy will go up to 6 inches. So, we're going to run it through this approximate 30-second more off, and then I'm going to check it, and we'll see if I took off too much or not. Because this will tell me 2/1000ths of an inch. Okay. 1.2695. So I am 19 thousandths over my inch, right? 1.269. Yes. So it's pretty close. Now I'm going to do that thing. Remember I told you it cuts a hair more off if you don't even move the wheel? Let's see how much more that hair is. Couldn't hear it, but I could hear it. It was cutting, and it cut all the way along when I did cut it. .262. Took off 7 thousandths. Okay, so it's just skimming it. More like polishing it. If we had a touch screen, or whatever you might call it, if you could feel this, you would see it's very smooth, very smooth. I would say if I was sanding based on my experience, I'd say this is 220 grit. 400 would probably smooth it up a little bit more, but it's the same as, it's about the same as 220 grit. Very, very nice. Okay, so we did that. Now, if you want to plane some really thin stuff, okay, and this is where you might say, oh, I'll use the drum sander. And it would work on this. This is some cherry, some old cherry I had. It's been resawn, and so it's got all of the saw marks in it from the bandsaw on both sides. And it's, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch thick or so. And I would like to make it thinner. It's a 1/4 and a 32nd right now. So if I took this thin piece and put it through here with the rollers doing what they do and the cutter putting the pressure on it also, it might tend to distort the board as it went through. Okay. It would come out looking flat, but it might distort the board as it went through. So I also going to turn this down to where things are getting really close together inside there. So what I suggest you do, if you're going to do thin stuff, is use a carrier board. I like my carrier board to be 3/4 thick so it doesn't deflect. It can be MDF, it could be plywood, it could be regular wood if it's nice and flat, but you really want it flat. MDF is pretty flat, plywood's pretty flat. But really flat, if you take your carrier board, like I did, a piece of 3/4 plywood, and I ran it through the planer. And now it's really flat on both sides. I took just enough off to make it really flat. Now, if you're using a piece of wood, remember we talked about distorted wood before, and certain kinds of distortion it does okay with, and other kinds it doesn't have much effect on. Cupping, like that 2x4 was before, if you remember, is when this board is like this, okay? So it's going to just catch on the edges. And I don't know how that is going to behave on this board. If it's cupped and the bottom side is curved, it's only sitting on this board in the middle. And so now when the rollers grab it, it's going to try to push these edges down and flatten this out when it planes it. And it'll do a little bit of that, but it still won't be seated nice and flat on my carrier board. So I don't know a solution for that other than you can turn it over, and I think it might work a little better to be planing on that pump rather than planing the two edges, and make your first pass that way. Make a light pass is my suggestion in any event, so that if it does catch, you won't have a disaster. It probably won't move your whole piece. Yeah. So when you do cupping, you can take some off of one side and some off the other side. Some off one side, some off the other side. If you take it all off of one side, this edge, this side's still going to be cupped. So cupping usually affects both sides, and so you really do need to turn it over and make sure you get both sides. So let's just see what happens. You see, this is a little cupped because, see? Now it doesn't like to do that. So got it the right way up now. Okay? So what we're going to start by putting this in here and raising this up until it starts to catch there. Pull that out. Reach forward. Okay? Caught just a little bit. Now I'm going to be ready. I'm going to be ready to help this situation if I begin to get in trouble. I hope I will. I'm looking for a board that's just a little thinner than this combination here, and I'm not finding it. So it's good to have something ready to push it through if it does. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, see, this is just a little under the total height of this. So it won't hit the planer or the rollers, but it will hit both these boards. If the planer tends to push this board back, so he does this on my support board, I'm going to be behind him with this. So he'll only go that far, and then he'll get pushed through the planer. Okay? May not need to do that. I'll put it behind it anyway just in case, and we'll see what happens. Okay? Pump side up on a carrier board. We already got close. We're going to take a half a turn, a quarter of a turn, just a little bit. See why it happened. You can too. This board is, let's say, medium here, thin here, and thick here. And what happened is, when it got to the end, it planed this part from here to here, because that's the thickest place on the board. The rest passed underneath. Okay? But we got started. Okay? So I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to advance a half a turn. And we're going to do it again. Second pass we got to about here. Third pass we're up to here. This is plain from here to here. This has still not been touched. Okay. So I'm looking at my edge here, and you can see that. You can see that it's pretty flat, pretty uniform from here up to about here. And then there's this really thin part right here. Now, if you were doing a project, you might decide, can I afford to take all of this away and end up with my total piece only being this thin, or am I going to have to give up this much wood and quit? But that depends on your project, so you have to figure that out. I'm going to turn it over now, because I got 3/4 of the way I've got support. But it's doing this on me. So I'm not going to turn it over yet. I'm going to get it more uniform yet further down here before I turn it over, so that I get better support when I do flip it over. I'm getting scarfing on the tail end, even though I'm holding this end down. This board is so thin that holding this end down doesn't really control this end much. It can do this, okay? Because it's so thin. So I've got bit. And you can see, well, maybe you can't, but I can see that there's quite a bit missing from here to there. Okay. not much you can do about that when it's so thin you can't hold it down. It just gets deflected by those rollers, and the end of it flips up into the cutter. And that's what you have. But this side is fairly smooth. It's still missing an area in here. So this very thin end is giving me lots of trouble. It's getting scarfed. It's not cleaning up good on this side either, because it's not flat enough. Because it's so thin, it's deflecting. Yep. But I'm going to run it through again anyway. I'm going to clean up this side at least, as if it was a showing side, a working side. But I can just look at my board and see that it is bowed. And you remember what I said about bowed boards, that they're going to stay bowed. Well, he's going to stay bowed. But he's uniform thickness all the way up to here where he got scarfed. And that's the best we're going to be able to do with that. Okay, so because this is thin, we're having some difficulties. And because it's warped, we're having some difficulties. I've never tried it, but because it is so easy to deflect and hold down onto the board, I might take my flattest side and use some double-sided tape, maybe a piece here, here, and here, and stick it to my carrier board so that it's held down all the way along, and then try to plane that through and see if it holds and stays down, it won't scarf, and it should come out flat. But I don't want to guarantee that, because I don't know if the double-sided tape's going to be strong enough, or we'll do it. It might do it on this piece and not do it on a bigger piece too, I don't know. Okay. But it's just a thought, to try and beat that action right there, due to it being bold. Okay? So that's so much for thin pieces. All right, one more thing. You have 3 pieces and you want them to all be the same thickness. And they're close now. Okay, this one's a little thin, this one's fattest, and this one's quite a bit thin. Okay. How would you approach that? Well, we know ultimately we want to end up with them all going through in one pass, and then they'll all be the same. But if we do try to do that right now, this one will be gripped, this one won't, this one on and off, okay? So what I would suggest you do is feed them all through, but be prepared to help the ones that don't get cut yet go on through. And you can do that by a simple pusher piece like this, because it's plenty thinner than what we're pushing. Okay? So I'm going to push the ones, be ready to push the ones that I know are too thin, and this one will probably feed itself through. So we'll get them pretty close, and when they get pretty close, then they will all be gripped and we will all go through together. Okay? So let's see how. sure that you saw what went on there. I started with this one because I knew it was the thickest, and I made an adjustment so he just got started. And then I put all three of them through. And like I thought would happen, this guy got driven all the way. This guy started and then he stopped because he was a little bit different on one end than he was with the rest of them. So we got partway through and then he lost his grip because this guy was holding things open too much and he couldn't get a grip. So I had to help him. This guy never touched anything. I had to help him go all the way through. Okay, but now they're closer. So we do them again. After we make a half turn. That time, we took a little bit off all of them, and they're fairly close. Now, they're not flat boards. They have a little bow to them, so they don't feel even all the way along. But if I press down on this one, now it does feel even. Okay? But he's just got bow to him, so he's raised up a little bit here. If I push him down, though, he's the same. Which proves again that the planer is going to make them the same thickness, but it's not going to take out the bow or the warp. Okay? So now these are pretty close together in thickness. If I wanted to be really sure they were really close together, I'd run it through one more time. But I might do that with trying to save my wood. If I'm getting close to the thickness I need and I can't afford to take off too much more, then I would run them through again without changing the setting, as we talked about before. And it should clean them up. Okay, so let's talk about this dust collector in a little more detail here. You want to, like I said, you want to be sure that it is collecting. So you want to look in the window here periodically or frequently when you're back on this side of the planer retrieving your boards. Take a peek in here and make sure you still see chips flying around. It's a baffle type system. It's not a cyclone, so it works by the chips fly in, they hit the baffle, they drop to the bottom, and the air goes out here. We want to keep our eye on how much is in the bin and empty it when it gets about half full. If it starts getting much more than half full, it starts to carry over because it's not real efficient because it's just a baffle system. And when it carries over, it gets in the bag of the dust collector itself, and then that's a chore to empty. So we don't like to empty that bag very often. So empty this sooner so it doesn't carry over, and we won't have to empty the bag as often. You shouldn't have to empty the bag. Matter of fact, don't empty the bag. It's a little awkward to get off and get back on right. So we look at that every week when we clean on Thursday. So you can skip that. But we do want you to empty this bin every time you use the planer. Leave it empty for the next guy. It makes a lot of chips on a small amount of wood. So you'll be surprised how much accumulates in here. So empty this every time. So that being said, how do you empty it? Okay, well, pull down this rope right here. I guess no oil. So now Ben's been cleaning some yellow hair, so there is something in here because we didn't clean yet. So you just take the bin out and take it to a trash can and dump it. It's that easy, and then you just put it back in here. There's a circle on the boards there. Get it close to the circle, then hook it. And I use one of these wires as a handle and bring this lid down and make sure the lid sits on the bin. Okay, That simple. Now, coming down, if you don't pay attention, you can do that. And that's not sitting down on there, it's hung up on this board over here. So now there's a big gap here and you won't get much pickup. Well, you get pickup, but it won't be very effective because it's sucking a lot of air through here. So when you bring it down, make sure it sits on the bin, not on this board or not on that board. And then you'll be in fine shape. Now, if you're going to do a lot of planing, you know you're going to make a lot of chips. You can save some time by when you start, or maybe the first time you have to empty this, is you can take this out, and then down at the bottom here, you can flip up these two side pieces on the bottom, and this support leg swings back over there, and now this will fit a regular size trash can. So if you do this, you put the trash can in there, when it gets near the top, you be careful to carry over again, but when it gets maybe 3/4 full, you can just pull the whole trash can out and set it over there and you're done. You don't have to dump anything. It's a little easier if you got a lot. And then put it back. When you're done, even if you've used the big trash can, put this one back. Put this one back. There, remember? Use the handle, write it down, and it's sitting on there. Okay, and that's pretty good. There's a sign up here, it tells you how to do that if you forget, but it's pretty simple. I hope you won't forget that. Not much else to say about that. We covered already how to turn it on and everything, so I think that's probably about all you need to know about that.